Imagine this. You've been good all week. You've skipped the late-night snacks. You even tried this thing called intermittent fasting. You step on the scale. Down 3 pounds. Victory. Fast forward 3 months. Same body. Or worse, a few pounds up again. What happened? Where did that fat actually go? And why does it feel like your body is secretly trying to drag you back? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. There's this crushing frustration with yo-yo dieting, this sense that your body fights weight loss at every turn. You're doing everything right. So why isn't it working long term? Here's what most people believe. We talk about burning fat like it's a log on a fire. Eat less, move more, fire gets bigger, fat disappears. Done. But your fat isn't just sitting there like wax on a candle. It's alive. It's talking to your brain. It remembers every diet you've ever done. And it can either become your biggest ally or your most stubborn enemy. Here's the hidden danger nobody tells you about. Crash dieting and poorly planned intermittent fasting can shrink fat cells without changing how they behave. Those shrunken but angry fat cells? They pump out signals that make you hungrier, slow down how many calories you burn, and prime your body to regain. Science shows that when fat cells only shrink but don't retrain, they act like deprived hoarders. The first chance they get? They refill. Fast. But here's the hidden opportunity of long-term intermittent fasting. Done right, it doesn't just empty your fat cells. It can actually reprogram them. Calmer. Less inflammatory. More metabolically flexible. Here's the twist. What happens in your fat cells in the first few days and weeks of intermittent fasting may matter more than what happens after an entire month. Get that phase wrong, and your body files intermittent fasting under just another diet. Get it right, and you flip a long-term switch in your fat cells. So let's zoom all the way in, down to the cellular level, and see what actually happens to your fat cells in those first hours, days, and weeks when you start intermittent fasting. Let's talk about what you actually feel when you start. Hunger spikes at your usual meal times. Brain fog in the afternoon. Irritability. Maybe you're hangry. Maybe headaches. Sleep might feel a bit off for a few days. If that's you, nothing's wrong with you. That's your metabolism freaking out because it's used to 24/7 access to sugar. Think of your body like a hybrid car with 2 fuel tanks. Tank 1 is sugar and glycogen, easy access, small tank. Tank 2 is stored fat, massive, but harder to tap. For most of your life, constant snacking means you're always running on tank 1. The fat tank stays locked. Fat cells stay full. So what happens in the first fasts, those first 14 to 16 hours? Glycogen in your liver begins to deplete after about 12 to 24 hours of not eating. Insulin drops. This is crucial. Science shows insulin is like a storage signal. High insulin says store fat, don't release it. When insulin finally falls, that lock starts to open. Hormone-sensitive lipase in your fat cells gets activated. Fat cells start breaking down triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol. Those fatty acids are released into your bloodstream as fuel. Picture tiny doors opening on your fat cells, like storage units finally rolling up their shutters, letting all that stored energy out. Why do you feel rough at first? Your brain is used to a steady drip of glucose. Now it has to adjust to using fatty acids and ketones. Stress hormones nudge you to eat at your old meal times. Researchers find that in the first days of intermittent fasting, hunger hormones like ghrelin spike at your usual mealtimes, then start to calm down as your body realizes, oh, we've got a giant fat tank we can use. But here's what's already changing in the first week or two. Fat cells begin to shrink slightly as fat is released. Insulin sensitivity starts to improve. Studies show even a few weeks of time-restricted eating can lower fasting insulin and improve how well your cells respond to it. Lower insulin means less constant pressure on fat cells to keep storing and more time spent in release mode. You may not see a dramatic change on the scale in week 1, but your fat cells are already getting the memo. We're not in permanent storage mode anymore. This early phase is like teaching your body where the keys to the fat tank are. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you keep going, past those first few awkward weeks, your fat cells don't just release fat. They start to change who they are. So what actually happens inside your fat cells after weeks and months of intermittent fasting? This is where the real transformation kicks in. Most of us start with fat cells that are like overstuffed trash bags, bulging, stressed, and leaking inflammatory signals. As weeks turn into months, the average fat cell size decreases, particularly in visceral fat, the belly fat, which is metabolically dangerous. Research in humans shows intermittent fasting tends to reduce visceral fat, the deep belly fat wrapped around your organs, more than some other patterns of eating with the same calories. The single most powerful shift is something called metabolic flexibility. Your body's ability to smoothly switch between burning sugar and burning fat. An inflexible metabolism means you're always hungry, energy crashes without snacks. A flexible metabolism means you can cruise for hours between meals, you can use fat as a clean, steady fuel. Long-term intermittent fasting trains fat cells to regularly release fat and refill without freaking out and hoarding at every meal. Let's talk hormones from fat. Your fat cells release leptin, a hormone that tells your brain how much energy you've got on board. With obesity and chronic overeating, leptin is high, but your brain becomes resistant. It always feels like it's not enough. With weight loss and intermittent fasting, leptin levels go down because there's less fat, but sensitivity can improve. Science suggests that as fat cells shrink and inflammation drops, your brain can start to hear leptin again. Then there's adiponectin, an anti-inflammatory hormone from fat cells. It helps your muscles and liver respond better to insulin. Studies show adiponectin often goes up as you lose fat, especially belly fat, meaning your fat cells become more like helpful messengers than angry alarm bells. Let's talk inflammation. Big, overstuffed fat cells attract immune cells. They release inflammatory chemicals called cytokines that worsen insulin resistance and increase risk for diabetes and heart disease. Long-term intermittent fasting reduces the size of fat cells, which means less mechanical stress. It decreases inflammatory markers in fat tissue based on animal and human studies. And it triggers autophagy. Think of autophagy as a cellular cleanup crew, recycling damaged parts inside your cells, including fat cells, so they run more efficiently. Here's the weird part. You're eating less often, but after a while, you feel like you have more energy, not less. Why? Fat cells consistently supply fatty acids. Your liver turns some into ketones, super efficient brain fuel. Fewer blood sugar spikes mean more stable mood and energy. Instead of being a slave to snacks, your fat cells become your 24/7 slow-release battery pack. Have you noticed that your hunger and energy feel different after a few weeks of intermittent fasting, maybe steadier, less desperate? Drop your experience in the comments, because what you felt is exactly what the science is describing here. So now you know your fat cells are shrinking, calming down, and getting metabolically smarter. But there's another layer most people never hear about, how this affects your skin, your brain, and even some of the biggest fears people have about fasting, like losing muscle or destroying their metabolism. Let's zoom out and look at the surprising side effects of retraining your fat cells and clear up some of the biggest myths that might be holding you back. Less inflammatory signaling from fat means lower systemic inflammation, and your brain benefits. Ketones from fasting are stable brain fuel. Studies on time-restricted eating and alternate-day fasting show many people report better focus and mood, even before massive weight loss kicks in. What about your skin? Chronic inflammation from overstuffed fat cells can worsen skin conditions, acne, dullness, slower healing. With long-term intermittent fasting, less inflammation, more cellular cleanup through autophagy that can impact skin cells too. You're not just shrinking your waistline. You're lowering the inflammatory noise your body's been living in. That can show up on your face. Then there's organ protection. Visceral fat and fat in the liver are tightly linked. Studies show intermittent fasting can decrease liver fat and improve liver enzymes. Less fat stored around organs means better insulin sensitivity and lower risk of metabolic syndrome. Now let's tackle the fears. Won't intermittent fasting destroy my muscle? This is one of the biggest fears. If I don't eat all the time, my body will chew up my muscle. Here's the science. Short daily fasts, like 14 to 18 hours, mainly encourage fat burning, not lean mass loss, especially with enough protein and resistance training. Research comparing intermittent fasting with regular calorie restriction finds similar or sometimes better preservation of lean mass when protein and workouts are matched. Muscle breakdown risk is higher with extreme, prolonged fasting without proper refeeding. The key? Adequate protein, strength training, and not combining aggressive fasting with severe chronic calorie deficits. Will my metabolism slow down and make me store more fat? Very low-calorie diets over long periods can lower metabolic rate. But studies on intermittent fasting and alternate-day fasting show resting metabolic rate tends to stay the same or even slightly increase in the short to medium term thanks to hormones like norepinephrine. Better leptin and thyroid signaling when inflammation drops. Less constant insulin means metabolism can stay more responsive. If you use intermittent fasting as a tool inside a sustainable lifestyle, not as punishment, your metabolism isn't breaking. It's adapting in a way that makes staying lean easier. Do fat cells ever go away, or are they waiting to refill? Here's the honest science. Most weight loss equals shrinking fat cells, not wiping them out. Large, long-term losses, like after bariatric surgery, can reduce fat cell number somewhat, but that's not the main mechanism for most people. The goal isn't to kill every fat cell. You actually need some fat cells. The goal is to keep them small, calm, and metabolically helpful. Long-term intermittent fasting with stable, healthy weight means less pressure on the body to create new fat cells and lower risk of rebound hyperplasia, lots of new fat cells, compared to repeated wild weight cycling. So no, you're probably not destroying your muscle. You're not automatically wrecking your metabolism. And your fat cells aren't sitting there plotting revenge. You're teaching them a new job description. Now the real question is, what does this look like not just for the next 8 weeks, but for the next 10 or 20 years of your life? And how do you actually make this stick? Most diets ask, how fast can we make the scale move? Intermittent fasting, used wisely, asks a different question. How do we train your fat cells, your hormones, and your brain to work with you for the long haul? You're not someone who goes on and off diets. You're someone who has retrained how your body handles energy. Let's connect fat cells to decades of health. Smaller, less inflamed fat cells mean lower risk of type 2 diabetes, better blood pressure and cholesterol profiles, less visceral fat around organs, which equals less silent damage. Animal studies suggest that fasting-like patterns can activate pathways linked to longevity, like improving cellular cleanup and reducing chronic inflammation. In humans, we're seeing promising improvements in markers that track with longer, healthier lives. What does a practical, sustainable approach look like? There's not one perfect fasting window. Common sustainable options include a 14 to 16-hour daily fast most days, a 5:2 pattern with 2 lower-calorie days per week, or earlier eating windows for some people, like 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. What matters most is consistency, giving your body daily or weekly time where insulin is low and your fat cells can do their job. Start with what feels doable. Maybe it's just closing the kitchen after dinner and pushing breakfast a bit later. Let your fat cells adapt gradually. Every clean fast is like sending your fat cells to the gym. At first they complain. Then they get stronger, smarter, and easier to live with. You're not at war with your body. You're retraining it. And your fat cells are finally getting the updated instructions. Less fear of food. More trust in your own body. Relief from constant hunger and cravings. If this helped you finally understand what's going on inside your fat cells, hit that like button so more people can see it. Subscribe if you want more science-backed, no-nonsense breakdowns of what's actually happening inside your body. Share this with someone who thinks their body is broken. Their fat cells might just need new training. And click on the video on screen to stay connected. See you there.